About to do something like that for you is Catherine Pearce, the founder and CEO of Carbon Zero Financial. The B2B FinTech provides white label climate technology for automatic measurement, monitoring and offsetting a cardholder's carbon footprints as they spend. This is data I want. This is data as a consumer that I think will be really important and change our habits. To her role as CEO, Catherine brings a deep passion for distilling complex dynamics to understandable and actionable frameworks. She's a social innovator with more than 8 years in behavioural change, education, marketing, social impact, media, community mobilisation. Catherine, teach this old dog some new tricks. Guys, please go berserk. It's the last one of the day. Great to have you here, Catherine.
So hello, the few but proud. I guess they didn't get the memo. To attend Drinks Later, you do in fact have to listen to this climate session. So they're going to be very sober at the end of this night. My name is Catherine Pearce. I'm founder and CEO of Carbon Zero Financial. As was said, that is a B2B climate fintech that sells white label technology to banks, enabling cardholders to automatically measure, offset, and reduce their carbon footprint as they spend. Now, Stu will be joining me on stage, and we'll be diving into climate change, financial services, banking, innovation, all of it. Prior to that, though, I wanted to set the stage a little bit, provide a tone for this conversation by sharing a bit about the backgrounds and passions which inform my approach to climate innovation. I have a deep passion for BS, and that is both calling out bullshit and using behavioral science as the foundation for innovation. So as was said, I have about 8 years of behavioral change work that started with sexual violence, has included diversity, equity, and inclusion, investing for minorities and women. And what fascinates me across all behavioral change work is the dissonance. We claim to want certain things. We claim to believe certain things. And then there's our actions, by which we don't effectively realize those goals and intentions. Now, a cynic would say, yeah, we're full of shit. We kind of suck. And that's a fair response at times. But I actually get really passionate and curious about that dissonance. When there is tremendous intention, when we do want certain things for ourselves and our communities, but we find it difficult to act on that, that is kind of an innovator's dream. It means that there's a tremendous opportunity for impact, for innovation, for new products and services. And climate is probably the most clear example of this. So there's never been a greater time of corporate and consumer demand, concern for climate. On the corporate side, 88% of publicly traded companies have ESG mandates in place. 65% of global GDP have 2050 net zero commitments in place. Let's say that one more time. 2050 net zero commitments, that constitutes 65% of global GDP. The corporate concern is humongous. Do they have any idea how they're going to accomplish it? Absolutely not. Now, on the consumer side, similarly, we see that climate concern and anxiety is higher than ever, particularly with Gen Z, where across gender, ethnicity, political party, it is the primary concern of young people. To me, this is ripe for innovation and opportunity. People want to do better, they're struggling to do so. So when I started Carbon Zero Financial, the first thing to do is understand that dissonance. Why? Why aren't we doing more? And frankly, every single person in this room knows why we're not doing more. Because when it comes to transacting according to people and planet, we still want it to be easy, and we want it to be financially gratifying. The good news is, making things easier and making things financially gratifying is kind of the intersection where FinTech thrives. And so as a B2B climate FinTech, we build solutions around that awareness, that to actually have an impact, it has to be easier to transact according to this concern, that it has to be easy and rewarding. So the primary suite of our features that we sell into banks to add to their credit cards are a carbon calculator, by which the end user can understand the carbon impact of their transactions, carbon offsetting, by which you can use credit card rewards points or interchange, allocate that towards carbon offsets, much as you would a flight or anything else. And then most critically, where I get excited, truly in the behavioral change, is our sustainable marketplace, where I study your consumer behavior and I match you to the sustainable alternative to what you presently buy. And because you're doing it in our marketplace, you get a discount. So quite literally, easier, and more rewarding. These are the types of innovations that we can create and deliver when we bring climate concern and FinTech together. That's a drop in the bucket. That's just one example. And so now we're going to bring Stu up here, and we're going to explore more of what this means. What is the opportunity at hand? Where is the bullshit? Where is the behavioral science? And frankly, how can this moral imperative, this existential imperative, become a tremendous market opportunity? Let's get into it. Woo!
Mic working, awesome. I'm just going to make sure that I have my single-use plastic water bottle here on stage right next to me in case I need a drink. Oh, non-single use. That's really fascinating how that works. Sponsorship opportunity for Intersekt 2024 is going to be sponsorship and provision of reusable water bottles. There you go, Rihan. There's like $10,000, $15,000 there. Giddy up. All right, let's get into it. You guys have just experienced in the last 5 minutes what I've been experiencing over the last several weeks, which is the amazing, unstoppable energy that this woman has, which immediately then gets to what is the carbon offset for Kat Pearce and what does that look like? But let's talk about carbon offsets. Don't we have a solution for this? We have a solution for climate. I can just pay as much money as I want and I can buy carbon offsets and I can go and do whatever I want, right? We've already got a solution for it.
So, carbon offsets, let's start there then. When we think of kind of some of the financial services, some of the things we gravitate towards as solutions, carbon offsets come up a lot. And they do in fact have a role to play. That is not, however, to say that this can be the primary mechanism on which we depend. So a carbon offset, essentially, for those who don't know, is this idea that if I emit so many tons or pounds, et cetera, of carbon into the atmosphere, there is a mechanism by which I can reduce that. I can also remove that equivalent amount through tree planting. A tree absorbs carbon through direct air capture, biochar production. When we speak to carbon offsets, there's a variety of methodologies, locations, price points. There's a lot that can constitute a carbon offset. Fundamentally, however, I just described a balancing act. So we're atoning for what we're doing. That's not necessarily progress. We don't want to maintain this course. We're not trying to balance this course. We're trying to course correct. So yes, offsets have a role to play, particularly when we consider industries that are very carbon intensive, like aviation. Until such time that we can actually innovate and they have better models that it's less carbon intensive to do the very act, we need to find a way to mitigate the impact. That is not, however, to say that we just get to offset our way out of climate change. And from a unit economics standpoint, a lot of the banks, I'm going to call y'all out, a lot of the banks who depend primarily on carbon offsets to meet their quotas and meet their ESG mandates, the price of these offsets is going to become exorbitant. When you look at the supply and demand, if everyone's purchasing offsets to be able to meet these claims, fewer and fewer offsets are available and they're in higher and higher demand. So one, it's unsustainable from an actual environmental perspective, it's unsustainable financially, and we really need to contextualize offsets have a role to play. It does not excuse us from actually making better decisions and innovating, creating better systems, products, and services.
So if you then think that through from, heavy industry, airlines and whatnot, but bring it straight back to financial services, what is it that banks can do? What is it that banks should do? What is it that fintechs, what is it that people in this room can do?
Absolutely. Well, a prime example is, I get it, banks, a lot of financial service providers didn't get into that business to be champions of climate. And now they nonetheless find that that's compulsory. That is going to be either because of policy or just public opinion. You can work with fintechs. That is an option, and a very viable one. I highly encourage it. But fundamentally, it's about looking at your own systems and processes. It's about looking at your own investments. So first and foremost, if you want to find a way to stop it, maybe stop investing in fossil fuels. Maybe there are things that you know you can do. Whether or not you do them is a question of your brand and integrity. We will, however, face the consequences of this at some point or another. I'm heartened by the fact that there's greater policy in places like Australia by which it becomes compulsory. We lack a lot of that in the United States. But fundamentally, looking at your own processes, understanding your own carbon footprint internally, with which a lot of fintechs can help, and then making better decisions, improving efficiencies, and enabling then your clients to do the same. When you think about the scale that a bank has, the number of access points, how they can help people, a theme of this conference has been providing insights and incentives that help your clients. Well, how can you help your clients live a more sustainable life? How can you use their transaction data, which is teeming with insights, so much data? How can you use that as nuggets for them to better understand their own climate behaviors?
So let's talk that through then. So what that then is pivoting this around and saying, if the mindset today is saving the world's just the thing that we have to do, and I'm going to pay a tax for that, which is carbon offsets, how do you actually then take that from a penalty? How do you turn that into an opportunity, and what do opportunities look like downstream?
Absolutely, and I would like to preface this just by saying, I do actually believe this is a moral imperative. There is a business opportunity here, and I love discussing that. Fundamentally, though, we have an obligation, I think, to tackle climate. It is an existential threat, and fundamentally, those who are facing the consequences of it, first and foremost, are those who already face inequity. So the most marginalized members of our communities and communities around the world are facing the effects of climate, and we all will eventually. So yes, existential threat. Yes, moral imperative. It is also a great market opportunity, and there's money to be made. We often say mother is the necessity of invention. Or no, necessity is the mother of invention. Okay, well, inventions can be profitable. It might be necessity. It also can be real nice for us in the long run. And so to that end, I would extol people to see how different industries have adapted around climate to create new revenue. So insurance is a really compelling example of this. Though we consider that industry to be risk-averse, somewhat stuffy, bureaucratic, organizations like Aon have really put a lot of capital and personnel into their ability to do climate analysis, risk analysis, create new loans around this, underwriting loans for solar projects. There's so many ways that our industries can intersect with climate solutions, and being flat-footed or dragging your feet means that you're just missing out on revenue opportunities.
But also one of the themes that's come through is a really big focus around data, and partly that's because of Australia's role in leading the charge on open banking, open data, consumer data, right? What does helping customers better engage with their climate data look like, and how does that become a thing?
Yeah, so again, transactions are teeming with data. So much of our lives are teeming with data. A theme from this conference has been, one, the digestibility of data will inform one's appetite for it. So if you just give me my carbon score, what the hell does that mean? I have no frame of reference for that. I have no context. If, however, you use that and you can bifurcate, these are the various sources of your life or spending behaviors where you're having the biggest impact. That suddenly becomes not only insightful, I understand which behaviors, it becomes a really effective conversion tactic. I can now cross-sell you something to address that, whether it is in fact cleaner energy, energy-efficient appliances, just the more sustainable alternative to what you presently buy. So data becomes the primary step by which we can gamify this and say, hey, this is your carbon impact, these are the sources of it. If you'd like to reduce it, I have some really great alternatives to what you're buying, or I have some of which are somewhat costly. I can get you energy-efficient appliances. I can help you transition to solar panels. There are some really high-ticket items, so that volume of spend on these cards is in fact increasing, while carbon impact is decreasing. But first and foremost, people need to understand why they should make this change and where in their lives are the greatest opportunities to reduce impact. And fundamental to that is having the data and seeing where are my behaviors contributing.
And a really good example of that, which you're possibly not across, but for CDR, we've opened up to banking, and we've also now are looking at energy. But if you take those two data sets, and then you have the question of, is solar panels, can I afford solar panels, and are they relevant to me? You can now get the energy data, you can get the weather data, you can get the sunshine data to then determine what it is that having solar panels would look like. You can then model that to then go, what would the cost saving be that I would get from having solar panels, and then package that up in a nice little loan, maybe from Moneyplace, maybe from somewhere else, to be able to then go, here you go. And that then becomes a way that you can combine these data sets in a really meaningful way that then helps people. Flip it around another way, do this, you'll save $150 a month, and
financial gratification.
You're doing good for the world.
Absolutely, and I think, again, when we look at the themes of this conference, interoperability, open data, and also digital identity, eventually, we have our credit scores. Eventually, there will be somewhat of an equivalent of a climate score. In what capacity are you exacerbating or not? So how much does our digital identity, how much of this data starts to inform our access to loans, there's so much opportunity if you start to have imagination around this and quite literally innovation around it. We sense, however, that on the whole, there's a lot of dragging feet, there's a lot of beating around what has to at this point be a dying bush, We can do better. This can be a really tremendous opportunity and align with KPIs for people and planet. But fundamental to that is to see it as an opportunity and to start to interrogate what we currently have in our systems and products. How do we improve this? How does this relate to this? And get a little excited about it. This is innovation. This is fun. For some of us, I don't know.
I'm tired.
He's been dealing with me for 4 weeks, the poor guy.
So if you take that forward then, how does a financial institution that's been around for a couple hundred years actually then engage in a meaningful way on that? How does that then scale as a solution for their customers? Like, it makes sense from the customer perspective, and we understand that. It makes sense from you're going to have to do this anyway, and this is a more meaningful way to engage. Talk us through the playbook. What does that actually look like?
Yeah, and so part of the reason that we are a B2B white label service is that fundamentally, you're not going to get brand credit for that which you don't share with your end user. So if you are even taking measures, but it's internally or behind doors, that is not something with which your clients will resonate. They don't see that. They don't understand it. So if you want to start to associate your brand with this, if you want to start to, for both user acquisition purposes, everything, engage people around this, it quite literally has to be part of their experience. And so our white label services are just embedded into the existing user experience, the mobile app. So when we talk about the 3 primary features, carbon calculator, now when you look at your transaction feed, much as any standard credit card, you open it up, you see your balance, you see your transaction feed. Next to that is a carbon impact. For that transaction, this is the carbon assessment. Just as you see your total balance for last month, so too can you see your total carbon impact divided by category. And just as, again, now we do carbon offsets, just as I can kind of recurringly pay my balance, I can automate that, so too can I automate, hey, every month I'd like this portion of my interchange or this number of credit card rewards points going towards offsetting. It is front and center to the user experience. If they want to shop, there's now a sustainable marketplace. If they want to redeem points, at every turn of the user experience, you are substantiating your commitment to both innovation and climate. But if that's not in front of them, if they don't see that, that is not something for which you're getting credit. And so I do think for these older institutions, some of whom are trying to do good work, if you are not engaging your consumer around this, and this is both corporate and consumer, you're not going to have the impact from a brand perspective that you want to, or frankly from an environmental perspective, because you have millions of cardholders. If you're helping each and one of them, even just reduce their carbon impact by 1 pound per year, 1 ton per year, think about how that adds up.
And that's great for an institution that has an ESG mandate and hundreds of millions of dollars to invest. What if I'm somebody here in the audience running a fintech? What does that look like if I have not millions of users, but I have thousands or tens of thousands or possibly even hundreds of users?
Yeah, I mean, if you are a smaller scale fintech, a lot of the companies with whom we like to work are fintechs, just because the alacrity with which we can move, they're swifter, et cetera. I think, though, even from jump, the beauty of if you are a startup is that you get to you have a blanker slate. So a lot of this is trying to correct what's already existing for institutions and banks. I would really encourage every startup to think about climate from jump, from the nascent stage of building. How are you incorporating these values into your identity and products and services? And even if that's just, again, rather if you're a neobank, et cetera, going paperless from jump, there are smaller steps you can take, but I think this is not going anywhere. If anything, the crises that we continue to face, our concern will be commensurate to the reality around us, and it's going to get more intense. And so you need to be considering these. I think startups should probably honestly consider ESG advisors, sustainability advisors, and then look to their peers. You normally get a discounted rate if you're working with another kind of early stage climate startup, and there are lots of them on every continent.
And so if we then move that through to thinking about customers, Australian specific example, which I'll fill you in later on, but I get all my tax advice now from TikTok. Primarily that's because you can get an interest-free loan from the government for about $50,000 or whatever your ABN GST return does. Thank you to the 2 people in the audience who understood that reference, but yeah, go get TikTok. But lots of younger people, much younger than me, are on TikTok, and it seems that climate is important to them.
Yeah.
Talk about engaging with younger customers on things that are really important to them, but don't necessarily matter to me in my ivory tower 60 stories above the ground as I sit there and manage my minions. How does that work?
I have to admit, I'm not on TikTok, but I will say, I'm sorry. I will say, however, as I mentioned, particularly when we look at Gen Z, across every political party, race, ethnicity, gender, etc., climate polls is the #1 concern. Now, when we think of Gen Z, it's kind of like, well, they're still out there, those crazy young ones, like what? The buying power of Gen Z is expected to exceed that of millennials by 2030. If you are not preparing for user acquisition of this generation, you're already behind. They are telling us what their concerns are, and they are coming. Dun, 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 dun. They're coming. Across, whether you want to look at McKinsey reports, so many different consultancies, they are ushering in a wave of what I refer to as conscious consumerism. They want their transactions to bespeak their values, and they want corporations to take a more explicit stand. I know that's actually been a point of contention at this conference. To what extent should a corporation draw lines in the sand and take political stances? In this case, I think you reap the benefit of the fact that, particularly in Australia, climate's not political. It is really just existential. Now, in the United States, it is political, and that's why it's even more contentious and difficult to innovate. But in places like this, reap the benefit of that. So how you engage that generation, they are data-driven, they want hyper-personalized experiences, they want, essentially, they've grown up with these algorithms that feed them exactly what they want to see and learn about, vis-a-vis TikTok, Instagram, etc. So I think there's such an emphasis on the hyper-personalization of giving the insights and incentives they care about. Though I'm talking about climate, I see a world where you can actually get insights based on the variety of things you value. So what if your credit card told you the frequency with which you shop from women-owned businesses, black-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses? This is a generation that cares about that, and the data is there. So what data are you surfacing to actually engage them, to make them feel like they're both understood, but that they respect the bank with whom they transact? There's a variety, but I do think this emphasis on data, putting up insights that they care about, and fundamentally prioritizing climate. It's their #1 priority.
And the bit or the extension of that I really like is then the nudges that can happen around that too. So we're starting to see this with financial literacy, so nudges around good behaviour with money.
Absolutely.
But actually being able to then nudge and say, well, Stuart, you purchased this, here is an alternative.
Yeah. Something I love is, I don't think there can be gamification without quantification. So if we don't measure it, we can't use it as a carrot to take the next step. And whether that's converting people by selling other things, whether that's from a kind of behavioral standpoint with climate, if we are not measuring it, it cannot actually facilitate us getting them to take the next step, whatever that may be. And so, yes, actually putting emphasis on what are the things we need to quantify to be able to gamify this experience, make the sustainable choice, the woman-owned choice, whatever that may be.
We've got a few minutes to go, but we're happy also to open up for any questions specifically from the audience. If we've got, oi, there we go, there we go.
Time flies when you're having fun, hey?
Yeah. All right, well, first of all, courageous to be here this late in the day, and I'm sure we're all here, not because of the drinks we get
On the video, the room is full of about 3,000 people.
Oh, absolutely. And the video starts sort of here. Anyway, thank you, I thought it was great. Clearly something that we should be talking about more and hearing about more. I'm not familiar with your business, but could you tell us some sort of existing use cases of where it has worked, what was the sort of conversation that led to it? Was it hard, easy to convince, and what's the customer experience that came from it?
Oh yeah, it's very difficult to convince in the United States. The risk aversion of banks, and also again, this is a politicized issue. So we were very fortunate in that Plug and Play Ventures is an incubator and venture capital arm. They assess 500 startups a year, they narrow that down to 30, and then those 30 demo live to their network of banks. They have the largest banking network of any incubator in the world. We were very fortunate in that we were voted the #1 innovative solution by those banks, and so as such kind of got to parlay into who wants to be our first paid pilot, who wants to, and so fundamentally we're still actually completing a lot of those initial paid pilots with them. What we're finding is users need, yes, the quantification, but then the actionable next step. So one of the biggest fall-offs we saw, and frankly where I think a lot of our peers fall short, is if you just give them the data, they feel very disempowered, which in fact disincentivizes them from spending. That does not align with the KPI of a bank. You need to drive spend on that card. And so what we've discovered through these is primarily, yes, you need to provide that quantification, after which, however, you need to provide the actionable next step, which for us is offsetting or then the sustainable marketplace. And so one of the key findings was data unto itself is not useful. You need to be facilitating and cross-selling as effectively as possible. But for us, a lot of our lead gen has been winning that experience, speaking at conferences like this, and fundamentally, that's why we're interested in places like Australia, because we see a greater appetite in Australian consumers and banks and in the UK than we're seeing in the United States, who I believe is probably about 10 years behind.
We're going to come back to that in a little bit as a close. We've got one more question just up the back there.
Question for Kat. With the work you've done in the green space, how much of it plays to, shall we say, the challenges of greenwashing and the challenges around reframing? Because even yourself, when you said insurers, they are entirely they're progressing, it can also be reframed that they're progressing because they have astronomical liabilities in this space, and they want to understand the data and the analytics of what environmental change could do. So how do you ensure you're not just dragged into another marketing exercise, which is a constant problem here?
Absolutely, and I think that's actually, as I said about offsetting, that's why I don't like relying too heavily just on that. So when we talk to banks, yes, we can make offsetting available, but fundamental is actually facilitating the behavioral change, which is why we're so adamant about that sustainable marketplace, about helping you shift your spend to the sustainable choice. There's a constant wrestling of recognizing banks are tremendous partners and that there's opportunity for scale, and there's so many everyday people who rely on them, and this is a wonderful access point to those individuals. At the same time, though, banks are egregious greenwashers. They think that just, really, we used recycled plastic. When you look at the low-hanging fruit they're willing to pursue versus the things they actually can and need to do, the dissonance there is not so compelling as the dissonance I described earlier. And so it is a constant wrestling of how do we work with people that we don't think are raising their standards enough, while recognizing that if we are on our moral high horse, it's everyday people who suffer most. It's everyday people who don't have access to the solutions. For me, that means we emphasize the behavioral change, not just offsetting. And it also means that when we engage with banks, it's all the while being quite candid, stop investing in fossil fuels. Stop investing in the things that are actually most exacerbating this. I'm not one to bite my tongue, and even with the partners with whom we work, I'm very candid about that.
I mean, we know that Australian banks have a propensity to debank anything that's related to Web3, so debanking fossil fuels is not much of an extension from there. In the last minute, then, to pick up on the thread about why you're here, you've flown thousands of kilometres to come here and be with us, to be in Australia.
I know.
Hopefully it was worth it, but why Australia?
Well, absolutely. Again, when we're looking at the partners with whom we want to work, when we look at what's the pace at which people are really adopting, that can exist anywhere, but policy has a huge role to play. And that which is not only the public pressure is there, but it's somewhat compulsory through government, that has a huge role to play in the fertile ground where fintechs and banks can thrive. The United States presently does not have that as much, though we've been very fortunate in the traction we've gained. We recognize that there's going to be climate innovations, there's going to be other markets and ecosystems that are way ahead, that are actually going to be the trailblazers in this. And so, if it wasn't clear, I have a lot of energy and I want to go with the people that are running fastest. So to that end, it was a pleasure to be invited here, but we are very interested in partners who take it seriously, see it as an opportunity, and are willing to act.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank
Ladies
you.
and gentlemen, give it up for Kat Pearce.